And we are live.
Episode 12, the evolution of sports performance. Last week, we were talking a lot about injuries. And I remember talking about during the episode that at the end of the day, I'm a trainer. I adopted PT. I adopted that world, learning about injuries. Today, we actually have a special guest. We're not too sure what his name is. We think it's Dr. Garrett. He does have his doctorate. He also goes by GMONEY. We're not too sure which one's his real name.
How about we combine them? Let's go Dr. GMONEY.
Dr. GMONEY. We're going to combine it. Dr. GMONEY. He actually works with DJ Strongcamps. He was actually on our podcast about a month ago in December.
Yep.
And now we're excited to pick his brain. I watch his content all the time. What's your Instagram?
At GMONEY Movement.
GMONEY Movement.
MVMT.
There you go.
MVMT.
And one of the things that he posts often that I envy, and it's because in jiu-jitsu, my Achilles heel has always been my growing. The amount of growing injuries I've had from people like splitting my hips, and I'm like, and then I see him like doing this insane stuff with his growing, doing the splits, and I'm just like, if I had hips like that, I'd be throwing up triangles a lot more often. But we're going to talk a little bit about performance. We're going to talk about training. We're going to talk a little bit about everything. Just kind of piggybacking off of last week's episode, we were talking about injuries. I have questions for you because your background, from my understanding, is you're a doctor of physical therapy, but it originated as a trainer. So my first question to you, Dr. GMONEY, what do you refer yourself as when someone says, "Hey, this is what I do for a living"? What do you say? And all joking aside.
Yeah, well, I would lead with I'm a physical therapist by title, but at the end of the day, I'm working with people who want to get healthier and feel better, which it's the role of a trainer as well. So, for the most part, people come to me. They want training, but maybe they're also dealing with an injury or something. So they want somebody with that background who understands pain and injury. But at the same time, we're working towards goals that you would still work towards with a trainer, like improving all aspects of health and fitness, strength, mobility, lifestyle things. It all is kind of encompassed in pain science. If somebody is dealing with pain, it's not all about just giving them just little rehab drills that are, in this title of rehab. You have to look at the bigger picture with things. So I would say, yes, first and foremost, I'm a physical therapist, but I'm also a coach. I'm also a trainer, a movement practitioner. My biggest thing is just getting people to unlock, I guess, the potential in their body.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I've known you for some years. I knew you as, when I first met you, I knew you as the trainer that was going through PT school. One of the things that I'm real big on, we talk about this often, is the lens that you view something through. So for example, if let's say somebody has a bad lower back, the trainer might go, your core is weak. The chiropractor might be like, your spine is not aligned. Everyone's perspective, and there's obviously going to be a bias. The lens that they view the problem is going to be different. Not to say that one's right or one's wrong. My curiosity is, how has your lens changed? I guess 3 phases. Before you started PT school, so just trainer only. Phase 2, trainer going through PT school, and now Dr. GMONEY. How has your lens changed over time, and what has remained the same?
Yeah, the lines have blurred. But isn't that funny how you go to 3 different physical therapists or 3 different chiros or physicians? They're all going to tell you something different. Even if you get imaging, like you mentioned, a bad low back, you get an MRI, 3 different physicians will or radiologists will read the imaging completely different. So I think you're spot on by saying, like, it's all about the lens you view coaching or training or rehab through. And it's all about what the client or patient just kind of aligns with. And that's going to be the approach that gets them better. So for me, I look at more things from a lens of movement in general.
Okay.
So like, what is, let's use back pain as an example. Like, what's the most aggravating position right now? Is it rounding forward? Is it extending the spine? So it's all about, let's find an entry point into these aggravating positions and gradually expose them to that. If we viewed it from a lens of, okay, let's look at this MRI, this X-ray, it shows you have a disc herniation. Naturally, I'm going to say, let's avoid flexion. Let's avoid rounding the spine. But I'm more so looking at it through a lens of movement. What do they want to get back to? They want to be able to round the spine without any pain. So let's find the entry point to that and progressively load it and progressively expose to that. While at the same time, you're still training through it. You're still avoiding positions that are causing extreme exacerbation of symptoms, but you're training in a way that isn't flaring up your symptoms. So I guess that's
present tense.
Yeah, I guess this is the lens I'm looking at it through, is how do we improve somebody's movement ability, whether you're going through an injury or not.
Gotcha. What was so we can call that your present tense? That's your lens right now?
Yes.
So let's say, I don't know, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, what was the lens then? Same, different, lot different, or similar?
Okay, I think, back then when I wasn't so educated on pain science, there were such things as like bad movement and good movement. So I would kind of group exercise into, okay, this is a rehab drill. This is a strength drill. This is a hypertrophy drill. This is a drill we want to stay away from because it's biomechanically incorrect. So I think now that I've evolved as a trainer, you realize, and just working on myself, being somebody who was always very naturally stiff, somebody with, hip injuries.
Stiff.
Oh, dude,
watch his Instagram. I'm like,
I've come a long way, man. Like after playing soccer in college, like I could touch halfway down my shins, extreme hip impingement, So I dealt with a lot of issues that I've overcome, and it took me working on my own issues to realize, like, okay, there isn't such thing as bad movement. We can't really group exercises into a rehab drill, a strength drill. Like, it could all be any of those things depending on the intention you give any exercise.
That's funny that you said all that, because I was talking about this last week, that biological principles are biological principles regardless of the state that you're in, right? So if you take, like an overload principle, for example, for someone who's healthy versus someone who's injured, we still have to put stress into a tissue to promote adaptation. So we're using the same principle. So I like that you talk about, back then, because I was the same. I think we all were, right? It was just like, don't do this. Last week I was talking a lot about the neck. I remember when we first started, they put all this fear in us as trainers. I remember doing my NASM back in the day, the NASM, and they were like, don't touch the neck. Don't move it. I'm like, I was like, there's too much hardware. There's too much stuff going on over there. I'm like, and then I started dealing with all these neck issues.
Compressed the neck all the time,
just
keeping
like,
it in one place.
The neck. And it was just like, they created this phobia of like, here's this list of all the things you don't want to do. And to this day, probably the only thing, the rule that I'm still consistent with from day one to today is do no harm.
Yeah.
That's probably like one of the principles I've learned.
Yeah.
Day one, I remember, don't hurt somebody, do no harm. And to this day, I think that principle still applies. How did your lens start changing during PT school? Because I'm interested.
Yeah. I would say as I was going through PT school, I've definitely changed my thought process on some things now. We both went through the FRC certifications, and I think during PT school is when I took mine, and that started changing a lot of my thought process on movement, there is no bad movement and all this stuff. But I think I became pretty arrogant after taking a course like that, where you're just constantly getting mind blown, all these paradigm shifts, and I thought I knew everything, you know. And I think it came with working with more and more people, actual people, to really change my thought process on things. Like, I don't know if I can give specifics right now, but I think just working with people in general is what changed a lot of my thought processes, especially when it comes to pain. Effect. Exactly. Yeah.
Get really high, really think you know everything. That's what I was just recently going through, and that's what he was telling me about too a little bit. You get so high with the knowledge, and then you just, I don't know everything. Oh crap!
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember one of my mentors years ago. He was I won't say his name, but he's a really good strength coach. I still think he's a phenomenal strength coach, and he was explaining something on strength, and he was going over speed. And I was talking to a friend of mine, his name's Garrett, ironically, and awesome strength coach as well. And I think he'll be here next week. And I told him, I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. This was back in 2017, 18. Mm-hmm. And I felt real weird because I disagreed with somebody that I had looked up to. And I was like, I don't know, because of this and this reason. And he goes, then just say that. I was like, and it was almost like a relief, because I was almost like, I felt like an imposter. I'm like, well, he's been around for a very long time. He trains professional athletes, this and that. And I feel so many people get caught up into the profiling of somebody, you know, how many acronyms do they have? Mm. And, you know, how do you, one of the questions he's asked me many times, I'm actually going to ask you the same question he asked me. How do you help people navigate through BS? Because there's a lot of, you could have somebody who has a lot of credentials and they're garbage, you know what I'm talking about, and you don't see any results, they don't help you. And then you'll have someone who's maybe quote unquote on paper not as qualified, but they get phenomenal results. Mm-hmm. How do you help navigate through that, through the BS? If you're not as a trainer, but if I'm a client.
Well, how could we say it's BS if the person on paper is the one getting the good results? Because I think people who are program junkies or certification junkies, they never actually work with people in person, so that when it comes down to working with people, they don't know how to communicate effectively. So they might know a lot in their brain, but they just can't communicate it to a point where the client resonates with that. So they don't do the work that is asked of them, or they just don't coach drills right, and they don't feel the drills have any carryover to their actual goals. Yet the other trainer with maybe not as much credentials, not as much certifications, they're just the better person, and then the client resonates with their way of communication a bit better. So they're the one getting the results. So how could we say one is BS and not the other? So I guess when somebody comes to me and maybe they didn't have good results with a trainer, or maybe they, you know, whenever somebody comes to me with a complaint of pain, I'm always asking, okay, what has helped you? Like what are some things that feel good? And they might give me an example of somebody else they've worked with. And in my mind, I might think what they did was BS. Like, oh, you know, my old therapist would do a lot of soft tissue work on me, like a lot of maybe joint mobilizations. And like in my head, I might be thinking, okay, maybe that's definitely the opposite of what you need. But they're over here telling me that this benefited them. They think it benefited them. So I'm going to validate that experience they had first. So that's how you build rapport at first. Because then if you're just like, oh no, that's BS. Like he shouldn't have been doing that to you. You actually didn't build capacity in the areas you needed to. Then they think that they're crazy, or they think you think they're crazy. Yeah. So you kind of have to validate their experiences first. And once they start to trust you a bit more, then you could be like, hey, look, you know, this isn't really my style. I'm more of a believer in this. Here are some examples of how I've worked through similar issues you're going through by more of a loaded approach or something like that.
Got it.
So I think when it comes to navigating BS, first you have to validate the BS, and then you can kind of shed your truths more, the more a client gets to trust you.
Got it. Got it. I always say feel is real. I remember I was listening to, who was it? Somebody was talking about foam rollers, and they were talking about how some of their pro athletes will work with foam rollers. What was Eric Cressy? I can't remember, but he goes, feel is real. I was like, if it gives them the experience they want to get, and then it might be placebo, maybe it's psychological, it could be physiological. Feel is real. If someone makes them feel better, then our job is just to add to it. So I was like, is the activity, the foam roll, is it hurting them? Is it actually creating an injury? So as long as you're staying with it within the parameters of, is it safe? And if they have a good relationship with their foam roller and they want to come in and spend the first 10 minutes just laying around, and it creates a parasympathetic effect, then who cares? Let them do it. And that's something that I've had to learn, over the years, where if someone wants to do something, I'll have clients come in and they'll do a warm up and some of the stuff, and they're on elliptical. I'm like, fine, that's fine. If they like, I need a sweat. I asked a client, because came in, did her elliptical, and I was like, she goes, oh, it just makes me feel good. I like getting a sweat before I start. I'm like, cool, then do that shit. She goes, is it okay? She thought I was going to say no. I'm like, heck yeah. If it makes you feel good and it primes your nervous system, and you're like, I'm ready to start training now, then keep doing it. Like, she's not going to get injured on an elliptical for 5 minutes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's one of those things that I try to tread carefully. I have had a few, not as often, where they'll do like random shit where I'm like, I did this and now my shoulder's hurting. I'm like, okay, I have to educate them on maybe that wasn't a good idea. But for the most part, if it makes them feel good, feel is real. If they feel good, it's real. Then keep at it. Even if I disagree with it, even if it goes against my bias, it is what it is. They feel good. Let's not take that away from them.
A huge mental thing too. If you're going into your workout feeling like crap, well, I'm probably going to have a crap workout. And then I actually liked how you brought it up too, the trust system. I like to bring up my dad, and I don't bring him up just because he's family, but because he's definitely one of my hardest clients, because he is very hard on me, and to the point to where he'll be honest with people. If he thinks I'm doing something wrong, he'll be honest about it. He's like my go-to guy. And I was working out with him. I started training him, and he didn't want me to train him anywhere else outside of the mobility stuff, because that's what I got certified through. So I was like, okay, cool. I started training him, and then eventually I started throwing out a little bit of knowledge. The trust started getting built. And then he said, okay, what you're doing is working. What should I do within the gym? And then when he asked me that, I was like, dude, this is awesome. Because now my dad's actually coming to me. He's calling me coach now for the first time. And now he's asking me for advice within the gym, not just within the mobility training. And it's almost like you have to have some kind of an understanding also as like a therapist side. Because like you said, you have to be able to validate, hey, this is what you went through. This is what happened. I have to play the mental parts too. I have to make sure, like you said, I have to make sure you're primed and ready and mentally well for your workout, because that will also benefit that side of it. So being a trainer isn't just, and this is the one thing I've been really learning, even with you, Henry, recently, it's not just the X's and O's like you told me yesterday. It's how great of a person are you, and how much do you actually create a relationship with that person, because then they'll trust you more, and then they'll have a better workout too. And that was like sorry, I just kind of put those two together, the mental part.
No, that's good. Yeah, you're definitely, training is about building relationships, we're not just robots. Like, all right, counting reps. And there is that part, because if they don't connect with you on that mental level, you can give them the right information, they're not going to get results. They're not going to do it. They're not going to feel the conviction in your prescription, right? When I tell somebody you have to do this many days a week, there has to be conviction and there has to be trust. So, and that's difficult, because when you're working with, let's say, for example, last night we were working with the Golden Strength Academy. We're working with, autism. We're working with Down syndrome. Yeah. Then we have kids that are 5 years old, 8 years old, 10-year-old kids. Then we have, clients who are in, almost in their 80s. And then we have college athletes. the expectations are in the dialogue is different. So my question to you is, how do you have your lens that you view through? How do you adapt based off of, I know you work with athletes. You have an older person, you have a 15-year-old versus a soccer mom. There's certain common denominators, right? We want to get them back to a certain baseline. What type of conversations are you having with people? What's similar, what's different, depending on those type of scenarios? A kid, a mom, a pro athlete, what's the same, what's different?
Yeah, I think it's all the communication, how you communicate with someone, what they're going to respond best to. The exercises might be the same. They might have similar goals. Like, say an athlete needs to build up their back squat or something like that, for an example. But still, the soccer mom is coming to you for lower body strength. Maybe they're both back squatting, but just the way you coach them, the way you hold them accountable for mistakes, it's just going to be different. I think it's all communication. With kids, actually, I actually use much more external kind of constraints with them because they're just so floppy. And it's interesting when you watch them move, like they always want to take the path of least resistance. So you have to give them more external constraints. So more chances of success so that they're not kind of always taking that path of least resistance. You're actually loading them the way they want to. Whereas somebody who has a bit more more of a training background, you can let them kind of get more into, free forms of movement, more free weights, body weight exercises and stuff like that. Just less cueing,
Got it. Another question I have, curiosity. This is something I dabbled in, and that I can never see myself doing it. And it's a very popular thing. I know you do it. Online training. The challenge obviously is when you're in front of somebody, you can be really specific and cueing and training and, coaching. How do you approach online training and try to create the most successful experience possible? I know a lot of people, maybe they can't just get to the gym and see you in person often, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe they're out of country or out of state. How do you, as a trainer, what's your approach towards online training to create a successful experience?
I think it has to be the right person, the right fit. Like if you're new to training, it's going to be difficult. And if you're not very good with technology, it's going to be even more difficult. So, because there's so many times where I'm trying to educate somebody on a specific drill and like they submit a video to me and I'm like, just wish you were here in person. I could just lock you into place using my hands. But yeah, I think I've found a way to make it as effective as possible just through a hands-on approach, because I don't just give any cookie cutter programs. I have everybody go through an assessment at first, whether it's strength, mobility, and then from there, I kind of create their programming. And then I like to update the program weekly based on how the previous week went. So say they had a flare up in something, maybe we're reducing volume or swapping out an exercise. I think a lot of online trainers, they just sell like, okay, here's a 4-week program. Here's a 6 to 8 week program that you do. And it's just the program stays the same. And then the client is left to kind of modify things on their own if something goes wrong, or the fact that they just see something stuck on paper, like, oh, I have to do this exercise for the 6 weeks. Maybe they might be going through a little bit more stress or have a little bit more pain or something, and they don't want to modify it because it's still there on paper, just mentally.
Yeah.
So I think having the coach being able to modify the program weekly, if needed, of course, we're not making huge modifications.
Yeah.
I think that gives them a little bit more success in staying consistent with the programming. And then I have them submit videos weekly. I indicate which ones I want to see weekly. We have monthly calls or calls every 6 weeks, however we set it up, to talk about some questions more in depth. They have access to me to ask questions if they need it. So it's pretty hands-on the way I go about it. Yeah. I'm not just kind of sending them a program and saying, all right, reach back out to me in 3 months, you know?
No, yeah. I've never heard anybody explain it that way. I had a pretty bad experience. Not bad as in the guy was bad. It was like, I almost felt like I got conned a little bit. Like a few years ago, I had done this program because I was, my bias is speed. I love speed. I love sprinting. I love being fast. I love power. So this guy, I won't say his name, but very popular online, had like a killer following. I had talked to him back and forth, and he put some like special on like a customized speed program. We'll figure out XYZ, what your baseline, all this stuff, right? I was like, cool. Put my credit card in there. And then I received the program. It wasn't a preset program. It was supposed to be a custom program. We'll build it. And I received the program the moment I input my credit card. I was like, wow, either this guy can see the future and knew what my needs were and immediately built the program, or he had a preset cookie cutter program. And I did that. So I did that 3 times, and all 3 times I got the same result. So you explaining it the way you explain it right now, it's phenomenal, because that's what I would do. I would do that. I would train with somebody who's going to customize it, communicate with me, do an assessment. There was no speed assessment. There was no questions. There was no questionnaire. It wasn't like, hey, here, do this. How many days a week? It was just asking. The only question they asked me was about frequency. How many days a week are you going to do speed? And then I was just like, but his website, killer website. Mm-hmm. This guy's a stud, because every exercise he demonstrates looks ridiculous. He played college ball. It's very attractive. Like his Instagram's attractive. His YouTube channel is really good. And he's a very likable guy. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, but then I was like, all right, I'm going to pull the trigger. It's a few $100, but I was like, dude, I wouldn't have paid $10 for this. So it was very refreshing for you to explain that, because I meant to ask DJ that question last time and I never asked him. And I have a lot of friends who do that. And a lot of them, I won't say their names because I don't talk negative about, they do that. They go, oh, dude, all you have to do is make a program, use a template, and then you're good. Just send it and you get paid. I'm just like, man, that's not, I didn't become a trainer to get rich. Mm-hmm. Right. And unfortunately, I'm sure you've seen it within our industry. It's grown where people are like, how do I get rich being a trainer? And the people who've been in the game as long as we've been in the game, we did not get into the game because we want to get rich. Like, unless you're training back then, when I started training in 2007. And unless you were training Brad Pitt or you're Tim Grover training, Dwayne Wade or Michael Jordan or Kobe, you're not making money. So we truly did it because we love sports. Most strength coaches have a similar background. We loved it so much, but we weren't good enough to go pro. We didn't get to that level. We were just short, but we kind of fell in love with it. The 12-hour days, making, 40 grand a year, working 12-hour days. We didn't care. We're like, we get to be in fitness. Mm-hmm. And now I see the trend has become like, I can take my shirt off. I'm jacked. I'm shredded by my program that's customized, and it's not, no pun intended, because this guy is shredded. This guy is shredded. But thank you for that explanation. Anything else you want to add about your online program?
Yeah, like you said, I've had many online coaches myself, and I try to model my online coaching based on all of my bad experiences. I try to have as much detail in the program so that I want to limit the amount of questions people have up front. Like, oh, I don't understand this exercise. Because I've had coaches who have never linked videos to their exercises. I've had to hound them and ask questions, and I feel like I'm annoying them because I'm asking them too much questions. So I want to make sure that they don't have a ton of questions to ask. I want it to be as straightforward as possible. And then, if they feel like they're not getting a customized plan, then it feels like it's a program that they could have bought for, $25
Yep.
that everyone else is getting. Now, it's one thing. I know some coaches will send people like a template for their first program because they want to use the training itself as an assessment. Like, okay, let's throw a bunch of stuff at you, see what you respond well to, see what you respond negatively to. And then from there, we can have a more customized approach. But still, like, that takes a lot of hands-on. You know, you're asking more questions, and you're telling them up front, like, hey, I'm going to send a lot of generic stuff at you. I want to see how you respond to this, and then we can fine tune it. But if they're not kind of telling you that, then you know this is just the cookie cutter approach that they give everybody. And I've had plenty of experiences like that as well myself.
Got it. One of the questions I have, because you're a physical therapist / trainer, a performance therapist, what do we call it? The trainer, Dr. GMONEY.
Sure.
I'm still struggling with, like, what do we call? Okay. No, oh my goodness. Now I'm forgetting my own question. I had a good question. Go ahead, ask him a question. I got to think about this one now. I'm like, what was my question? I distracted myself.
How about we go back? Because when you talked about your dad, this reminded me of your previous question of like how my lens kind of changed going through PT school and now. And I think I was so black and white when I was going through PT school. You're learning all this research and stuff like that. So it's like, okay, this is the way to do things. Foam rolling is bad. It doesn't lead to long-term change. But now I'm just like, okay, exactly what you said. If this feels good and we can do the things that make long-term changes, more effective loading strategies directly after, and you're feeling good, then foam rolling is positive. You have to make somebody feel positive changes for them to buy into the approaches that are actually going to work. And just like your dad, you got him to feel good with the mobility work. He asked for that mobility work, so you gave that to him, and then he wanted to take the strength approach because now he trusted you to train him with strength.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, like, we can't just say, oh, people need to do mobility work before they're able to do strength training. You probably could have had him go directly into strength training, and still feel good in his body. There is no prerequisite for one or the other, but he wanted to feel good with what you were certified in first, to get you to trust him to do that. So nothing's black and white. There's different approaches for everything. And it all could be blended. Always
going to look different per client. Mm-hmm. No cookie cutter way, like we've been saying this whole time. Always going to be a little bit different. My dad, he's like, hey, I trust you in this area. Let me get you there first. And then I got him there. And then he's like, okay. And I gave him a little bit of advice in the workout room once he trusted me in that area. He understood it. He said, that makes sense, actually. It helped him feel better too in the weights rooms. And and some clients, you get the referrals and they're like, dude, I trust you. I heard what you did with this person. Do it whatever you want.
Just
right?
Repeat.
So it all depends on the person, where they're coming from, and what idea do they already have about you. And then it's just like you said, you got to take it easy. You have to validate them. You have to give them that peace of mind and kind of run with it. And
here's another example with my dad. So he recently had a neck injury, and I gave him some exercises and whatnot, and he was just in too much pain to do them. So I told him to just go see a physical therapist, use your insurance. And he went to see the physical therapist, and it was a very old school PT. And he told him his posture was bad, and that's why he was in pain. But he actually really took a lot away from that. And he was taking notes, and he came home, and last time we spoke, he was like, this therapist, he was telling me about posture and what I should do, how I should sit at work, how I should drive. He's like, why couldn't you have told me this? And I'm thinking like you just paid for an hour PT session just for somebody to tell you advice that your grandma could have given you. Like, your posture's bad. But I'm so out of touch with reality, with what I know in pain science. And I was thinking like, but I would have never told you that. Like, there is no such thing as bad posture. Posture is dynamic. You need to be able to stay moving and gradually expose your tissues to painful areas. But like, he doesn't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
He resonated with the old school mindset of bad posture. The PT's telling him like how much the head weighs. And if you round your head forward, it's going to put this much stress on the spine. But you know what? He started implementing some better posture, like when working, quote unquote, better posture, more upright posture. And he's starting to feel better. And I'm like, wow, like who am I to say this approach is BS? Like, and that's now something I have to get better at is not taking these conventional approaches that have been debunked by research and saying they don't work, because we're in the 1%. Like our knowledge, we've taken courses, we've had experience with different things, and it's so easy to just be like that certification junkie and say like, oh no, the research says this. And not validate the experiences that
feel is real.
That feel
his perfect posture driving made him feel better. Your dad's all like upset at you. Why didn't you tell me this?
I know.
I can't believe you're holding back the knowledge. Like,
right?
Okay, I got a question for you then, because you said this twice. You said old school PT. You said that twice.
Right.
For obviously you're what we would call a new school PT. Could you, for parents, people who are listening right now, they're like, what's old school PT? What's new school PT? Could you define the differences between the two?
Definitely not for me, for them, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think, years ago, there's just a lot of poor research done on what is good and bad for the body. We have like, when you squat, you shouldn't, have your knees cave in, like valgus. That's terrible for the knees. Or rounding your back at all is terrible for your spine. Or slouching is going to cause this. There is like almost, you can predetermine movement as being, you could predetermine injury based on how someone moves. But we know that people can get injured even in these biomechanically sound postures. So I think that's more of an old school thinking of like, oh, you need to avoid this because this negative consequence will happen, and there was almost like a fear of movement. So PTs were almost deemed like, I don't know, like wimps, because like now there's more of like a push toward movement optimism. I think those are the new school PTs that are reinforcing just movement variability in general, being able to move in as much ways as possible so you can give your body more experiences to understand these ranges of motion, so that if you do go into these biomechanically inefficient positions, you're not going to injure yourself.
Yeah.
So it's more of exposing yourself to those things. But now people are getting so far on that spectrum that they're saying form doesn't matter. Like, oh, you should back squat with a rounded, with a butt wink to prepare yourself for that. But the thing is, like, you could do something like a rounded back deadlift where the weight is forcing your back into a rounded spine and you have no control over that. I would say that's poor form. That's not efficient. You're not going to lift the most weight doing that. Or you can use a Jefferson curl. And now what looks like a bad exercise, there's actually a form component to this exercise where it seems inefficient. Like, it's not a bad formed deadlift. It's actually, you could do a Jefferson curl which is basically a segmented forward fold with straight knees and a rounded spine. It's an exercise used in gymnastics to develop posterior chain flexibility. There's a poor form. Like, people turn that into a rounded back RDL and they don't turn it into what the exercise is actually supposed to do. So I think we could get so far on each side of the spectrum. The old school PT, there are bad movements. And then there's the new school PT where form doesn't matter. Everything is about movement optimism. I think there's a middle ground there.
Oh, 100%. I saw an interview years ago. I'm a diehard strongman fan. Yeah. I've been a fan of strongman for a very long time. So they were interviewing Bill Kazmaier at the time. And this is probably, I don't know, 10 years ago. and they asked Bill Kazmaier. No, it was longer. It was when Mariusz Bucianowski was competing. So this is early 2000s, 5-time world's strongest man. And they asked him, they said, why do you feel that Americans don't win as much? Like, we make it top, but we can't get that number one. You know, Brian Shaw got it a few times, but we're getting beat by these Europeans and whatnot. Like, what do you think? Because Bill Kazmaier, he was a strong man. He was so good in his prime that they told him that you're not allowed to compete. Literally 5 years, they didn't let him compete because he was too good. That's like telling like LeBron James, you're not allowed to play basketball in the NBA.
Yeah.
Because you're too good. It made no sense, right? So he said his reasoning was, he said Americans were too form conscious. And I was like, what? And then there was a video of, he was describing Mariusz Bucianowski, and it shows him doing the deadlift with the car. He was deadlifting a car, right? The car was behind him. He had the bar in front of him. And to qualify or to win the event, he needed X amount of reps, right? So his first 6-7 reps looked very traditional, like a deadlift. And then Bill Kazmaier, he was the speaker. He goes, oh, we don't know if he's going to be able to get 12. Like, he looked like he was about to have failure, and he still needed another 4 just to get the record. So then all of a sudden, he turns it into a Jefferson curl RDL. You got to go look this up on YouTube. I've never seen somebody RDL a car before until now. And he's just inching his way up. He's shaking. And we're like, oh, he did all that work. He's for nothing. He's going to hurt his back, and he still needs 3 more. And he ended up doing 5 more. And they're like, wow, look at how much strength he has. And they had interviewed him. He was talking in Polish, and he goes, oh, they train rounded back. This is 20, 30 years ago. They were training. So they were, and Bill Kazmaier was like, well, Americans, we don't train this way, because the announcers, there was 2 announcers, and they were like, he's going to blow his hammy. He's going to blow his erector. He's going to blow something. And he ended up hitting he beat the number. And it was very interesting to see how his positioning changed from rep 1 to rep 12, you know? And it's just like, was it good form? Was it bad form? Like who determines what's good and what's bad?
Did he get injured? No.
No, he didn't get injured.
No, that's what I'm saying.
He ended up winning World's Strongest Man after that. Ended up winning.
That's what I'm trying to point out, though. Is like, did he get injured? No. Did he hurt himself? No. Does he train to do it? Yeah. And it's like you were going on too. It doesn't. There's dependent scenarios, right? It depends on the objective. What's my goal? What am I trying to do? Maybe a strict form might be better for that weight. Maybe for this case, I don't have a stronger back. Maybe I need to go lighter weight for that. I can still do both. So that way, if they ever have to pick up a package outside, they can still do it, right? They go stiff spine for now. And then in practice, though, we're trying to teach them how to round it. It all depends on objective and goal.
Now, I know those powerlifters, they will implement like rounded back deadlifts as an exercise. And now there is a form component to that round back deadlift, right? So they're actually training that as an exercise. Now, then the question is, like, so if rep 1 and rep 12 look completely different, you start off with a neutral spine and relatively neutral, you're never in neutral, but then you know, the back starts to round more and more. Now that's more of an expression of a max capacity. You're taking the path of least resistance. So maybe the Americans were just afraid to take that path because they thought they were going to get injured. But I do think, you know, what's the best way to train for that? It's probably doing both, you know, having the exercise that exposes you to that round back position, builds resiliency there, builds capacity there, and then also training the most efficient movement pattern. How can we get the prime movers doing most of the work? And maybe that is keeping the spine as flat as possible, and you're biasing more of the loading to the glutes and hamstrings.
Yeah.
So you probably need both.
Yeah. I did have a question about clearance, and specifically regarding injuries, because one of the issues that I feel I've worked with PTs a couple times. One was for a neck injury. One was for shoulder car accident. And I remember just leaving. At the time I was like 21 years old. And I was like, this is garbage. And I left because it literally wasn't doing anything for me. And I remember another time, like getting cleared and my body not feeling good. So how much, you mentioned you played soccer in college. How much does understanding the demands of the sport factor into your decision-making? We're saying, okay, you're clear to throw a baseball again. You're clear to do that sprint again. How much does your experience as an athlete and understanding demands, Or let's say it's a sport, because obviously you didn't play college in every single sport, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like the injury I've been dealing with since last year is my elbow. For jiu-jitsu, it happened rock climbing. I fell off a cliff, and my elbow is like 70%. It's been like 8 months, but everyone's all like at the gym, they're like, dude, but you're lifting hard, you're heavy, like you don't look injured. I'm like, yeah, but I don't have someone's full body trying to hyperextend my elbow.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, if someone did that, I don't feel good about that. So how does your experience with sports and understanding demand of sport influence your decision making with dealing with injuries and clearance?
I think it's big. Like, you want to understand, does the sport require high speed? Does it require slow movement? Like, a strength sport is going to be way different than a jumping athlete. They're going to need to be able to produce speed without as much pain and apprehension. So for me, it's all about finding the entry point. How much can somebody do of their sport or main activity before their symptoms come on? So I think a more old school approach is like, okay, let's completely avoid this activity until you're 8 to 12 weeks. But what we know now is that detraining happens really quick. So just because you feel like, okay, the injury's gone, pain is basically reduced, I could go back to training. Now what happens when you go back to training? Are you just going to re-injure it or cause a significant flare-up because you weren't doing the minimal amount during your rehab before getting fully back into training? So I think there's when it comes to clearance, I think you should always be doing something that's going to be somewhat specific to the demands of your sport. So with your elbow, can you still be doing slow, controlled strength training for the muscles around the elbow? Maybe you're not able to, climb right now because just the demand on the forearm flexors and extensors is just too much. But maybe you're still able to, do some pull-ups, some lat pull downs, some bicep curls. You're able to train around the injury. So I think it's first and foremost, how can we train around this injury? How can we do as much of the painful or aggravating task as possible without flaring up the injury? And then from there, it's just giving it time and respecting those biological parameters.
Got it. How do you deal with, because I've dealt with this a few times, I'm sure you have, we all have, athletes have with high pain thresholds. So we have the one extreme, right? But now we have the other extreme, the extreme of, dude, I can push through it. You have the athlete who's mentally tough, and you actually are like, you're not cleared, but they're like, no, I'm good. I have to go roll. Jiu-jitsu athletes, I know I'm one of them. I'd probably be awful because I know I'm going a little early, and then all of a sudden I'm like, I'm 70%, now I'm back to 30%. Mm-hmm. And I just erased 3 months of progress. How do you deal with that type of person, an athlete who has a high pain tolerance, and they're just like, no, dude, I could just push through it?
Yeah, both individuals, like on both sides of the spectrum, the person who's afraid to move after an injury and the person who just wants to get back to it immediately, they both lead to issues down the line. Like the first person who's afraid to move after an injury and they want to just rest, don't move. If there's any pain, they develop like a phobia of that movement later on, where like they never really get back to 100%. But then the other person just prolongs the injury and prolongs the recovery time. And I'm in that same side of the spectrum too. When I have an injury, I just want to train through it and just hope time will fix it. So those people need more rest. The other people need more exposure to the movement. So it's tough. I think that person, they're tough to change, and they're only going to learn by pissing off their symptoms. They're only going to learn the hard way. And this is how I've had to learn. I'm a physical therapist, and I'm still an idiot when it comes to rehabbing my own injuries. You talked about the groin before this call, and I had a very significant groin injury that lasted a long time, and it's just getting better. It's been a year and a half because I constantly would train through it. I wouldn't want to give up my activity, or not necessarily give up, but significantly reduce my activities. As soon as I started feeling better, I would go back to loading it back where I was when I was healthy, and I would just flare things up. So I think that person just needs to accept that it's going to take longer for them to heal, because you're probably going to be aggravating things. But along that process, you're going to learn what is the optimal dosing for you.
Got it.
So whether you like it or not, you're going to learn.
Got it. Yeah.
You're going to flare your issues up. This is your personality. You're going to piss things off to realize what is the optimal.
No, it's funny you said that, because that's totally me. I'm like, I'm at 70%. That's good enough. It needs to be at like 40. And then I'm like, all right, let me take it serious. Mm-hmm. So it's like 70 becomes my new 100. That's kind of the way I've treated it. I've just accepted. So like for me, training jiu-jitsu, I'm like, I don't have time to wait to get to 100. I was like, I've accepted that 70 is my new baseline. And I just got to bump up my 70, where eventually my 70 is stronger than my old 100. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the way I view it myself, because I'm awful too with my own rehab. But I'm like, all right, let me just bring up my 70. And I think I've done okay. Still piss things off all the time, but I'm able to do the things I love. I could train hard still, but I do know there's a lot of athletes that are like that. And I have to, that's the way I've explained it. I was just curious. I'm like, hey, they're like, I had a pitcher hit me up. They have a UCL strain and they pitched a game. I was like, and they said they couldn't move their arm. I'm like, I didn't want to let my team down. I was like, okay, so you would have let your team down for about one game, but now you're going to let them down for the next 6 weeks because you could pitch for 6 weeks. I'm like, what's it costing you? So it's, I think it's important that we educate our athletes, our clients on like, okay, you're going to be that. Okay. Let me just give you the facts on what's going to happen now if we do that. And I've accepted that 70, 80 is my new 100. And I'm okay with that. As long as this is my mindset in jiu-jitsu. If my 70 is stronger than your 100, I'm good with that.
There you go.
I don't know if that's right or wrong, but it's right for me. It's right for me. And I think just learning, where people's mindsets at, will determine like how we approach, the situation. So any other questions?
There's so many factors that go into that, 'cause I'm the same exact way. And then it actually can, if you keep going that way, eventually it can actually turn you into the opposite. That was what happened to me. So when I hurt my shoulder, I tried pushing through my labrum tear, and I got my end of sophomore year for like 8 months, and my jump shot completely derailed. I went from having like the most beautiful jump shot to I can't get my arm above my head. I'm like trying like Ray Allen it, like trying to force it up and throw it. Yeah. and it completely messed things up. And then eventually it just got to the point to where finally I was like, screw it. Like I'm going to have to get this fixed sooner or later. And it actually derailed me to, instead of being more, okay, I'll play through it. I'll play through my ankle sprain. I'll play through this. Now I'm like afraid, because I'm like, dude, this completely took away everything from me. I don't want that to happen again. So then the mindset changed. And it plays in factors also within the culture you're around. Growing up with Marines, it's very much, push through things. The school system too was very much push through things. And it can be very, very hard. And I would say if you try to talk to me about that back then, it'd be very difficult because of the culture. And that's what we think we struggle with too, is as trainers, you've experienced it. Guys come in thinking they know everything. Guys come in with a certain mindset and attitude because that's what they were raised with. And it's hard to try and get them to change it. So for you guys, having worked with athletes like that, my last question I'd probably ask them is, how do you try and get them to see it a different way? And what's the best way to kind of go about that? To communicate with them, like, look, if you keep doing this is the effects of it.
Yeah, it also depends on the tissue that's injured. So like what both of you guys have are different. You're probably more dealing with a tendon injury in your elbow. Tendons respond terribly to underloading and rest. Labral issues, connective tissue injuries, they need to rest. They need time. I have labral tears in my hips as well that I never got operated on. It could be 1 to 2 years before like pain is like significantly reduced. But if you keep pushing through that, it's just not going to heal, and then it's going to lead people to think, okay, now I need to get this operated on because it's getting worse.
Yeah.
And I do think for both injuries, you have to flirt with the pain a little bit. Like, you know, maybe your shoulder at the time couldn't tolerate high loads, you know, playing basketball, but it could have responded well to some more gentle mobility work, some isometrics, some, you know, slow, heavy strength training. But you were giving it the high speeds too quickly. So I do think it helps to educate on the nature of the injury, the connective or the tissue that is injured, talk about time frames and, you know, what these tissues will respond best to.
Yeah.
And then, man, it really helps having injuries and experiencing them. You know, you being a coach who've been injured, you play jujitsu, you know, you've injured your groin, you've injured different things, your shoulder. You have this experience now to give your clients, be like, okay, this is what happens when you push too much. This is what happens when you give the body the rest it needs. This is what happens when you find that middle point between loading and rest and recovery. This is what actually got me out of pain. You know, I think these examples are way more beneficial than just research and what a textbook says.
I'm just gonna go injure my ACL, my Achilles, everything, so I can really connect with clients.
Exactly.
Got it.
Exactly.
It. No. It is true though, because you know, I have dealt with a long list of injuries, you know, and now I'm closer to 40, and I am more athletic than I've ever been in my entire life. I'm stronger, I'm faster, I'm leaner, I feel more dynamic, and you know, training is the reason I'm able to do those things. In my 20s, I was strong, but I was stupid, and I was just tough.
Yeah.
You know, but toughness doesn't fix an injury; it just makes it worse. But with proper training, proper coaching, you know, the human body can do some pretty incredible things.
Yeah.
So, we can keep talking about injuries for a long time. We'll probably need like a one of the Jocko podcasts. They're like 4-hour episodes. No, we appreciate you. How do we find you? We want to train with you online. I know you said it earlier. I guess we could say it again. We want to train with you in person. We want to train with you online. How do we find you? Tell us a little bit about how we can find you.
Yeah. Instagram at GMONEY Movement. And I have my YouTube page going on as well. GMONEY Movement there as well. Or my name, you could search Garrett Colgan. Yeah, send me an email, go on my website, gmoneymovement.com. And yeah, let's work together.
There we go. Dr. G Money. Thank you guys.
G-Money.
We appreciate you guys for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll talk to you guys next time.
Have a good one.